We'll move on to our next speaker. You know, the core philosophy we use in digital transformation and innovation in terms of how we work is a paradigm called Open Innovation 2.0. You know, we talked earlier about our leap ahead strategy and looking for open source. The last time I met, you know, Thomas, I think we met in Barcelona, and you know, probably neither of us have been on a plane since. But you've been one of the pioneers in terms of open in healthcare. And you're going to talk to us about OpenEHR data for life, but I've previewed your presentation. It's seminal, and it's much more about an electronic health record, but how data, you know, is really an essential piece of modern healthcare moving forward. So over to you, Thomas. Look forward to your talk.
Yes, I'm actually going to talk more about health data and how this affects the new architectures of healthcare software. And I'd like to start by setting the stage. And it was great listening to Professor talk about COVID, because COVID has been a big boost to digitalization, obviously, and not only in terms of software, but also new models of care, which obviously require change even in the infrastructure. But it's not just that, it's also the shift of care from communities to the home. And it's also this patient engagement, which is now a big topic. Patients want to help manage their own care by getting access to their health record. So all these three together basically are pushing for change in the health IT space. On the other side, we have the institutions struggling with existing software, interoperability issues from monolithic solutions. Usability is not very good, and also, of course, the TCO in a lot of cases is quite bloated. So I really like this quote, because I do remember us talking about the data will follow the patient. The data will follow the patient, like a mantra for health IT. Well, we can safely say it hasn't happened. So the only way this happens today is if the patient actually carries data around in a box in a paper form. And this is unfortunate, but it also means that the methods we've been trying to do this with are not fit for purpose, and we need a different approach. Now, I mentioned COVID, and what COVID has done, it's elevated this, I would say, data agenda to the top. So politicians today start talking about data, about how it's locked in, how it cannot be used for innovation, and how the vendors are actually locking it into their own applications. And this was a quote from Matt Hancock earlier this year. But if it wasn't for COVID, we wouldn't be hearing these thoughts. Now, everybody understands, because COVID proved that without good data, you can't even manage a country. So what he goes on to say is that the right approach would be to separate data from applications and actually manage it in a consistent data platform across the NHS, as he says. Now, this is dear to my heart. I've been saying this for 7-8 years, and it's really great to hear the decision makers starting to think about along these lines. Now, health and care data is specific. Why? Because it's one of the few industries where you want to keep data for life. For life means not just to enable the care process, but also in terms of timing. You want the cradle to grave record, because what happened even at birth might have an effect on the care you receive, or the outcomes that are a consequence of care. So you really need to think about data differently than in other industries. And of course, you have to think about systems differently as well. Now, EY in this research paper, which I urge you to read, talks about an ecosystem as being the future. And I listened on Tuesday to Optum, who was advising the Irish government, and he talked about the same thing, about the third generation of EHR, from best of breed to monoliths to now, I think they called it EHR as an innovation platform. And this is exactly what we're talking about. It's an open platform, a clinical data repository, and then all applications speaking to the same data. Now, graphically, this looks like this. It's really about changing from silos that we have today to data layer at the center, and then applications, devices, logic, algorithms around that data. Now, of course, this is the end state. The question is how we get there. And they published this one as well to talk about an intermediate state. And I think this is a good place to start. So the idea is to start pushing the data out of existing systems, putting it in an open format, and then developing the new apps on top of this data instead of on top of the old architecture. And then using this consistent record to connect to local and national systems, patient portals, and so on. So this is, again, really good research by EY, and it's very practical because this intermediate state platform, you can start this today. Okay, so it's not just EY. Gartner is saying the same thing. Instead of the silos that we have today, you have layers of data, application, and user interface. Exactly the same approach as EY. So what is also interesting is that this is not totally new in healthcare. If you think about PACS, the imaging world, they've been doing this for 30 years. We have standard called the DICOM, which is used by all modalities, all equipment manufacturers, and all viewers, so that it's the same data that can be produced and viewed by different vendors, applications, machines. PDF is the same concept in documents, but of course the structured data, the data that we want for AI, for decision support, for making sense of it, is still kept in the silos of the applications that produce the data. And this is what we are trying to do at OpenEHR, which is pull the structured data out of applications, manage it separately, and do not let applications keep their own data. So this is the approach we are championing, and it's really an organization that's been there for 25 years, started at UCL in London, but it's really defining standards in order for making this happen. And it has one specific thing which is really useful, and that is that it separates the content, the data models, from the technology, from the software. This means that clinicians, experts, build the data models, and the software engineers build the software. And you would think that this is normal, but I can tell you from experience that it's usually IT people building data models and clinicians sometimes coding, and both of these should be avoided. So just to give you a feel for what this looks like, this is, we call it an archetype. It's a basic data model for storing everything about the blood pressure. And the attractive thing here is that it stores not just the data, but also the context of the measurement. Now, why is this important? Because once you start sending data around, unless you have the full context of the data, you cannot interpret it. To give you an example, if somebody's riding a bicycle and they have a blood pressure of 120/80, and you don't know that, you actually don't know whether it's a high or low blood pressure. So this is really, really important. You also set validation and rules to bind to terminologies like SNOMED and LOINC at the model level, and this is done before coding. Of course, then you put these together into the next level, which we call a template, and the template is use case specific. So a GP will have different requirements from the blood pressure model than the cardiologist. The cardiologist will want a lot more detail. Now, the archetype, of course, is universal. It's to store any type of blood pressure, whether it's from a personal device or vital signs, like I saw in the presentation at the beginning. It uses the same building block, but it can be presented in different ways to cater to the use case. And this covers basically the way we need to use this in software. Now, we have a lot of people contributing, about 1,500 clinicians from all around the world. The size of the flag here means the size of the clinician community. The Nordics are leading the way. Norway has done a lot of modeling. Sweden is just now starting. Brazil, US, UK, and also China. But the bottom line is we have 1,000 clinical models built and free to use. All of this content is open source, meaning it's free to use. And they come from more than 100 countries. COVID is interesting because when COVID started, the Chinese modeled the data first, then the Italians, then the UK. But once it got to the UK, we already had really good models to use for customers building COVID assessments and care screens forms. Okay, so the question is, what is this software called? And Gartner came up with this term called the digital health platform. And the digital health platform is basically three things. First, a vendor-neutral data core, this data for life, as we call it. Then a set of low-code tools to quickly build applications. The issue here is that there is a huge backlog of applications in all care settings that will never get written because of they don't have enough resources. So we need to change the way we build applications, and using low-code tools is one of those ways. And of course, the third one is we need a consistent user experience, because if somebody is now using 5, 6 applications, they need to work in a similar way so as not to confuse the user and not to create issues. And a portal, of course, keeps all this in sync. Okay, so how do we begin? I talked a little bit about this before, but if you think about the systems we have today, it's not just the core system that you think about. It's also all the other systems which have been built through the years. There's a trust in London that claims they have 6,000 applications. I hope your hospitals are doing better than that, but imagine answering a GDPR query of where is this patient's data, or the request to delete the data, which is one of the GDPR requirements. It's actually impossible to do. So we're trying to solve both problems at the same time. As I said before, pushing the data out into an open format, but instead of building the next new application on the left, we build it on top of this data, so that we set the stage for creating an ecosystem which does not, where applications do not hold their own data, where they actually sit on top of a consistent care record. For this to happen, it has to be an open format, because the vendors will never agree which proprietary format to use. So this is what we call bimodal IT. It's transition. We can keep the old systems running for a certain period of time, move the clinical data out, manage it separately, and then build the new applications on top until we're ready to either replace the core or just keep it as an admin system. Okay, so this also goes out of the individual institution. If we think about a region, which is really becoming the order of the day. So we can normalize at each site separately, and then create a virtual care record across these sites without even centralizing the data. We have several customers using this approach, and it's really interesting because some of them feel like it's their data and they don't want to share it, except for instance for research or for putting together cohorts of patients around a certain rare disease. They need to combine data from different entities. But as long as you have governance of data, you also get a choice of applications, which means that if one institution builds an app, it will run across the group. And of course, for instance, Scotland has this idea of built once for Scotland. And this is an approach that can do this. Of course, you can also centralize. These two are exactly the same. The only difference is that in this case, the data is federated and distributed. In this case, it's actually centralized. Okay, so just quickly, who is already doing this? I always mention Moscow because it's probably the world's largest EHR. 12 million citizens, and it's one consistent big database for 1,000 institutions of Moscow. Really, really big. And it came in very handy during COVID, because you can imagine how easy it is to collect all the data of testing, of vaccinations, or diagnosis across, if you have it in one place. They're using the centralized approach, obviously. All the big university hospitals in Germany, Charité, Heidelberg, and so on, are using a different approach, but using this exactly the same data models. They're using the distributed approach because in Germany, they do not centralize. They actually keep on premise, but they do allow anonymized data to be shared through federated queries for research purposes. NWIS, the Welsh National Program, decided to use this approach, a shared care record based on OpenEHR. A children's hospital in my home country in Slovenia is SCHIM-ZEMRAM stage 6, proving that it can be done with an open platform. All 4 of the leading vendors in the Nordics, Finland, Sweden, and Norway, use OpenEHR inside their products. Over 30 trusts in the NHS, including Oxford, Somerset, and so on. Birmingham University and West Midlands Cancer Alliance is really interesting because what they did was, instead of building the applications in individual hospitals, I think there's 11 of them, they built a centralized application and pushed it out to hospitals because the patient can then go to any one of them and will have a consistent view of their record. I mentioned Oxford Health. This one is interesting because it's a really, really big trust specializing in cancer, and they have decided to base their entire data for research, for forms, for prompts, and the core EHR on OpenEHR. And the last one, just beginning of this year, the Catalan Health Service announced it will standardize all the data in Catalonia in the public health sector. This is probably the largest project of its size, on par with Moscow. But of course, it's at one of the more advanced health systems, which is why it's so important. And this is now in RFI and going into RFP in the fall. Okay, just quickly about our company. We are in healthcare for 30 years. We have about 120 customers in 16 different markets through 15 different partners. What we provide is this digital health platform based on open data. And we're very proud that Gartner has put us on the map with some very big players, as you can see here. We're probably the only ones that do it on open data in this slide. And just to recap, so monolithic EHRs are really impeding digital transformation. I'm sure you've seen this firsthand. So end-to-end disease management will actually require many apps and applications working with the same data. And data is for life, so applications come and go. They change every 15 years. So we actually need to separate these two in order to keep the data from cradle to grave. And digital health platforms are the way to do that, but they need 3 things: a personalized UX, local tools, and a vendor-neutral data layer. And OpenEHR, as you've seen from the examples, is now used by the most advanced health systems. And we as a company offer a platform that makes this happen. So with that, I hope I'm within time. I would really like to thank you for your attention.
Great, Tomas, and this was a really excellent presentation, and certainly a view that we align with. And I think your comment there in your last slide, you know, monolithic EHRs are impeding digital transformation is very true. And even though it was the plan in Ireland to implement these monolithic EHRs, we haven't done it for a variety of reasons. And that's really a core to our Leap Ahead strategy. So I hope, you know, maybe in a year and a half when you're giving this talk to somewhere else in the world, you'll actually be including Ireland as one of the places that is leading. So we look forward to the collaboration opportunity.
Just a piece of information, Martin. So Stockholm actually this year canceled a big monolith procurement, and just last week, the middle region of Finland did the same. So it's actually happening. After 3 years of negotiation, they just decided to cancel.
Yeah, no, that is the new reality, and it is an opportunity. So thanks, Thomas. We really appreciate it. No doubt we'll have you back at a future DAF